I just needed a small loan, about $20,000 for my personal project, but was refused by my father and brother even though they have a huge fortune. They don't know that I have in my hands something that can destroy everything. My name is Amelia Hayes, though most of the world that matters, or rather, the world that thinks it matters, knows me, when they bother to acknowledge me at all, as Amelia Montgomery Hayes. The Montgomery appendage is the key, the cursed skeleton key to a world I inhabit, but never truly belong to. I am 40 years old, the daughter of Charles Montgomery, a titan carved from granite and ambition who presides over Montgomery Industries, a sprawling empire of finance and influence in the heart of Chicago. I am also the sister of Edward, groomed successor and golden son, 5 years my senior and light years ahead in the currency my father values, ruthless success. I run a small nonprofit focused on bringing arts programs to underserved communities. It's meaningful work, the kind that fills a space inside me that the echoing halls of the Montgomery mansion always seemed to amplify. My husband, Daniel Hayes, is a history professor at the university. He's kind, steady, brilliant in ways my family would never recognize, because his brilliance doesn't translate into stock options or board seats. Our daughter, Olivia Livis, 19, sharp as a tack, fiercely protective, and thankfully possesses a clarity about the Montgomery dynamics that I only acquired through decades of painful lessons. Tonight was one of those lessons, gift-wrapped in damask napkins and served on heirloom china. The weekly family dinner, a command performance. The Montgomery dining room is a study in oppressive grandeur. Dark wood paneling absorbed the light. The massive crystal chandelier overhead felt less like illumination and more like a glittering weight poised to drop. Charles sat at the head of the table. Naturally, his posture, even seated, was ramrod straight, his silver hair impeccably groomed, his ice pale blue and sharp, missing nothing, assessing everything. Opposite him, Edward, the heir apparent, radiated a polished confidence that always set my teeth on edge. He'd just closed a significant merger, the details of which Charles was currently extolling with a rare warmth reserved only for his son's triumphs. Double quotes. A masterstroke. Edward, show initiative, real killer instinct. That's the Montgomery way, Charles declared, his voice resonating in the heavy silence. He took a deliberate sip of his wine, his gaze sweeping over Edward with undisguised pride. Isabel, Edward's wife, preened beside him. Her smile was bright, practiced, reflecting Edward's glory. Charles, darling, he learned from the best, she purred, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Edward's arm. Her diamonds caught the light, little shards of ice. She was always impeccably dressed, impeccably polite, and impeccably dismissive of anyone outside her charm circle, especially me. My own contribution to the conversation, when I finally dared to make it, felt like tossing a pebble into a well. That's wonderful, Edward, I managed, the words tasting like sawdust. I tried to inject genuine warmth, but it felt thin. Things are moving forward with the Youth Arts Center expansion too, Dad. We secured a grant, and the city council seems supportive of finding us a larger space downtown. Charles waved a dismissive hand before I could finish, his attention already drifting. Yes, Amelia, your little projects. He didn't look at me. His tone was flat, bored, noble, I suppose, in its own way, but hardly building anything real, is it? Doesn't exactly contribute to the bottom line, does it? A distraction, mostly. A familiar tightness gripped my chest. The practiced smile I wore felt brittle, threatening to crack. Little projects, decades of being minimized, of my passions being trivialized, compressed into those two words. Beside me, I felt Liv tense. Her fork scraped against her plate, a small, sharp sound in the otherwise hushed room. I saw her jaw tighten, her eyes flashing towards her grandfather. I placed a hand gently on her arm under the table. A silent plea, don't. It wasn't worth the explosion it would cause, the Arctic frost that would descend. Isabel, sensing the slight shift in atmosphere, chose that moment to twist the knife, ever so delicately. Well, she began, her voice syrupy sweet as she turned to me. "You certainly landed on your feet, Amelia. Finding Daniel, I mean, so stable. It must be such a comfort, knowing you don't have to worry about, well, keeping up." The implication hung heavy in the air. Comfort? Because he's not one of us, not wealthy, not ambitious enough. Dan, bless him, remained composed, though I saw the slight flush creep up his neck. He met Isabel's gaze evenly. "I find teaching history immensely fulfilling, Isabel, and Amy's work changes lives. We're very happy with the life we've built." His voice was calm, dignified, a shield against her passive aggression. But the damage was done. The familiar narrative reinforced. Edward, the brilliant successor, I, the disappointing daughter with quaint and profitable hobbies, lucky to have married a decent man from the middle class. Liv pushed her and touched food around her plate, her silence radiating disapproval. Edward smirked, a fleeting expression, but I caught it. He enjoyed this. He thrived on being the center of our father's universe, while I orbited in the cold, utter darkness. I focused on breathing, in, out, maintained the facade. The smile stayed pasted on my face, but behind it, the hurt was crystallizing. Years of these small cuts, these dismissals, the blatant favoritism, they weren't just stinging anymore. They were accumulating, hardening into something that felt dangerously like resentment. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a counterpoint to the expensive meal I couldn't taste. I looked across the gleaming mahogany table at my father, at my brother, at his wife. They were a united front, a fortress of wealth and expectation I could never breach. And for the first time, the resignation I usually felt began to curdle, replaced by a flicker of something else. Something colder, angrier. The dinner dragged on, a slow-motion replay of countless others. Edward's achievements, market trends, Charles's pronouncements on the state of the world, Isabel's social calendar, my own existence, my work, my life reduced to a footnote, an inconvenient afterthought. When we finally escaped into the cold Chicago night, the relief was palpable. "Are you okay, Mom?" Liv asked, her voice tight as we walked towards Dan's sensible sedan. Parked blocks away as usual, the Montgomery driveway was reserved for appropriate vehicles. "I'm fine, sweetie," I lied, forcing another smile. But the knot in my stomach remained. Fine was the last thing I was. I felt unseen, unheard, undervalued, a ghost at my own family's table. Dan wrapped an arm round my shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, Ames." His warmth was a comfort. But tonight, it couldn't quite reach the chill that had settled deep inside me. "He just dismisses everything I do," I murmured, the words barely audible. "Like it's worthless because it doesn't make money." "It's not worthless," Dan said firmly. "It matters. What you do matters." I knew he was right. Intellectually, I knew it. But the weight of my father's disapproval, the constant comparisons to Edward, the casual cruelty, it was a heavy burden. And tonight, it felt heavier than ever. As we drove away from the imposing stone facade of the Montgomery mansion, leaving behind the suffocating atmosphere of judgment and expectation, I stared out the window at the city lights blowing past. The anger wasn't fading this time. It was settling in, taking root. The feeling of being trapped, of being perpetually underestimated, began to morph into a different kind of energy, a quiet, simmering resolve. Something had to change. I didn't know how, but the passive acceptance was beginning to feel impossible. The cage, however gilded, was still a cage, and I was starting to rattle the bars. The need for change became concrete a few weeks later. My nonprofit, Outreach, had outgrown its cramped basement space. We had momentum, community support, and a waiting list of kids eager for classes. The grant I'd mentioned at that dreadful dinner covered programming, but not capital expansion. We'd found a potential building an old print shop in a neighborhood desperate for revitalization. It needed work, but the potential was enormous. It required a significant down payment, bridge financing until our major fundraising campaign kicked into high gear. A bank loan was proving difficult without substantial collateral or a guarantor. There was only one place I could realistically turn to for that kind of backing, despite the acid taste it left in my mouth. The Montgomery family coffers, specifically Edward. Since Charles had nominally stepped back from day-to-day operations, though his shadow loomed large, Edward managed the family's private investments and trust funds alongside his corporate duties. Making the appointment felt like scheduling my own humiliation. I prepared meticulously, assembling business plans, projections, community impact reports, letters of support. I rehearsed my pitch, trying to frame it in terms Edward might understand: return on community investment, positive PR for the Montgomery name, a long shot, but worth trying. Edward's office was a sleek, modern contrast to my father's imposing, traditional suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River. Chrome and glass reflected the skyline. He kept me waiting for precisely 15 minutes, a subtle power play I recognized instantly. When I was finally ushered in, he was leaning back in his high-back leather chair, fingers steepled, exuding an air of bored tolerance. "Amelia," he greeted me, not bothering to stand. "Make it quick. I've got a call with Tokyo in 20. I swallowed the lump of pride in my throat and launched into my presentation. I spoke about our reach, the kids we served, the proven impact, the opportunity the new building represented. I laid out the financials clearly, the amount needed, the repayment plan. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, devoid of the desperation I felt clawing at my insides. Edward listened with a neutral expression, occasionally glancing at his ridiculously expensive watch. When I finished, silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the faint hum of the city outside. He picked up a heavy glass paperweight, turning it over and over in his hands. "Outreach," he mused, the name sounding foreign, almost comical on his lips. "Cute." He finally met my eyes, his gaze cool and appraising. "Look, Amelia, I admire your enthusiasm. Really, I do." The condescension dripped from every word. "But let's be realistic. This is a high-risk venture, negligible financial return. Frankly, it doesn't align with the Montgomery investment strategy. We focus on growth, on scalable enterprises, on assets that generate substantial ROI. Edward, this isn't just about ROI," I argued, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. "This is about community. It's about giving kids opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. There's value in that. Immense value." He smiled thinly, a flash of teeth. "Value, perhaps, but not the kind that appears on a balance sheet. And ultimately, that's what matters here. The answer is no, Amelia. The family's resources can't be tied up in charity projects disguised as businesses." "It's not a disguise," I said, my voice rising slightly despite myself. "It's a viable nonprofit model. We have strong community backing, corporate sponsors lined up, who will likely get cold feet when they see the real renovation costs." He interrupted smoothly. "No, it's too risky, too nebulous. And honestly," he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, "Dad would never approve. He expects me to safeguard the family's wealth, not fritter it away on feel-good projects that are destined to fail." The mention of my father, the casual assumption that Edward was merely fulfilling his wishes, felt like another slap in the face. He wasn't just refusing, he was reinforcing my status as an outsider, someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted, whose endeavors weren't worthy of the Montgomery name or its money. I knew, deep down, this wasn't just about risk assessment. Edward didn't want me to succeed independently. My success, however modest, might somehow dilute his own shine, might offer an alternative narrative to the one he and father had so carefully constructed. "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice quiet now, flat. "Just, no, that's it," he confirmed, standing up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Always good to see you, though." The dismissal was absolute. I walked out of his sterile, expensive office feeling numb, The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a deeper level of isolation. It wasn't just the money. Though the loss of the building felt like a physical blow, it was the confirmation of my utter irrelevance within my own family. They controlled the resources, the power, and they had made it unequivocally clear that I was not entitled to any meaningful share of it, not even as a loan I intended to repay. Back home, Dan listened patiently as I recounted the meeting, his expression growing tighter with anger on my behalf. He held me as the numbness gave way to a wave of cold fury. "We'll find another way, Ames," he said fiercely. "We always do. Screw him. Screw them all." His support was my anchor, but the injustice of it burned. This wasn't just business. It was personal. It was Edward, backed by Charles, deliberately keeping me small, ensuring I remained dependent or insignificant. The phalanx was closing ranks, protecting its own, excluding me. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring into the darkness, the scene in Edward's office replaying in my mind. His smug refusal, the casual way he wielded the family's financial power like a weapon against me. The warmth of Dan's belief in me warred with the icy reality of my family's disdain. The hurt was still there, a dull ache behind my ribs, but overlaying it now was something harder, sharper, a calculated resentment, a dawning realization that passive acceptance and quiet perseverance weren't working. They saw kindness as weakness, passion as folly. If I wanted anything in their world, or even just to escape the weight of their disapproval, I would have to play a different game. The rules, it seemed, were being rewritten. Or perhaps I was finally starting to understand the real rules they had been playing by all along. The chill I'd felt leaving the mansion dinner had solidified into something dangerously close to ice. Life settled back into its rhythm, but the undercurrent of resentment remained, a low hum beneath the surface of everyday activities. Outreach scrambled, seeking alternative funding, downsizing ambitions, the dream of the print shop fading into the realm of what-ifs. I threw myself into the work, finding solace in the tangible results, the smiles of the kids, the gratitude of the community. It was a world away from the Montgomery sphere, a world where value wasn't measured solely in dollars and cents. But the Montgomery sphere had a way of pulling you back in, usually when you least expected it, and always on its own terms. The call came not from my father, but from his longtime attorney, Mr. Harrison, a dry, precise man who had handled Montgomery affairs for decades. He requested my presence, along with Daniel's, at the main Montgomery residence the following Tuesday. Regarding estate planning matters, was all he would say. My stomach clenched. Estate planning? Why now? And why were Dan and I explicitly invited? It felt ominous. I learned later, through a careless remark Isabel made to a mutual acquaintance that filtered back to me, that Edward and Isabel had been summoned weeks ago for preliminary discussions. We were an afterthought, a necessary formality, perhaps. We arrived at the mansion on Tuesday afternoon. The air inside felt even heavier than usual, thick with unspoken tension. Charles was seated in his study, a room dominated by a massive mahogany desk and portraits of stern-faced Montgomery ancestors. Edward and Isabel were already there, seated opposite him, looking composed, expectant. Mr. Harrison stood beside the desk, a leather-bound portfolio in his hands. Charles acknowledged our arrival with a curt nod. "Amelia, Daniel, sit. No pleasantries, no small talk." He gestured towards two chairs positioned slightly off to the side, reinforcing our peripheral status. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Charles has asked me to outline the primary provisions of his updated last will and testament and associated trust documents." He began, his voice neutral, professional. He opened the portfolio. What followed felt like a slow-motion execution. Mr. Harrison detailed the distribution of the Montgomery fortune, the intricate web of trusts designed to preserve wealth and control for generations. The vast majority the controlling shares in Montgomery Industries, the primary real estate holdings, the extensive investment portfolios was designated for Edward. Upon Edward's passing or incapacitation, it would pass to his son, William, ensuring the direct patriarchal line remained unbroken. Isabel was well provided for, naturally through clauses tied to Edward's inheritance. Then he came to us, to my daughter, Amelia Montgomery Hayes. Mr. Harrison read, his voice unwavering. I bequeath the sum of $1 million to be held in trust, managed by the primary trustee. He nodded towards Edward with disbursements allowable for approved expenses related to health and welfare. He paused. To my granddaughter, Amelia Hayes, a similar trust in the amount of $500,000 is established under the same terms. $1 million out of a fortune estimated in the billions. It wasn't just the amount, though the disparity was staggering, insulting. It was the control, held in trust, managed by Edward, disbursements for approved expenses. It was a pittance wrapped in chains, a token gesture designed to look like inclusion while guaranteeing none. It was, in effect, a final, posthumous declaration of my inadequacy, my daughter's lesser status. Silence descended when Mr. Harrison finished. I felt frozen, the blood roaring in my ears. Beside me, Dan's hand instinctively found mine, his grip tight, grounding. Across the room, Edward wore an expression of solemn, false humility. Isabel looked serene, satisfied. My voice, when I finally found it, trembled slightly, but with anger, not weakness. Father, I began, my gaze fixed on Charles. Is this truly how you see things? After all these years, is this what you consider fair? Charles met my gaze, his eyes devoid of warmth, hard as chips of ice. Fairness is irrelevant, Amelia, he stated, his voice cold, precise. This isn't about sentiment, it's about legacy. The Montgomery legacy requires strong leadership, proven capability. It requires someone who understands how to maintain and grow what I've built. He gestured towards Edward. Edward has demonstrated that capability. The inheritance reflects that reality. It goes to those best equipped to steward it, those worthy. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air, more damning than the spoken ones. You are not worthy, and my contribution, my life, my daughter. My voice cracked on the last word. Do we mean so little? Your choices have been your own. He replied dismissively. You chose a different path, a simpler one. This ensures you and Olivia are provided for without burdening the estate's core structure. Provided for like dependents, like children unable to manage their own affairs. The betrayal felt absolute, a physical blow that knocked the breath out of me. It wasn't just about money. It was about value, about recognition, about love. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being dismissed, sidelined, deemed insufficient. The careful facade I maintained, the years of swallowing hurt and disappointment, crumbled in that moment. Looking at my father's implacable face, at Edward's barely concealed triumph, something inside me snapped. The hurt didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a surge of icy rage. So profound it felt almost calm. I saw them clearly then, not as family, but as adversaries. My father, the architect of my lifelong diminishment. My brother, the willing beneficiary, complicit in his ambition. Isabel, the smug accomplice. A new kind of calculation flickered in my eyes as I met Edward's gaze across the room. He held all the cards, all the power, all the wealth. But knowledge, I realized, could be a different kind of power. The look I gave him wasn't one of defeat. It was something else, something colder, something that should have worried him if he hadn't been so blinded by his victory. We left the mansion in silence, the weight of the encounter pressing down on us. Dan tried to comfort me, his words a mixture of outrage and support, but I barely heard him. The numbness was back, but this time it felt different, not passive, but protective, a shield forming round a core of hardening resolve. The finality of my father's decision, the blatant injustice of it, hadn't broken me. It had forged something new in the fire of that ultimate rejection. Life has a cruel sense of irony. Weeks after the devastating meeting about the will, the architect of my family's carefully structured legacy suffered a blow that defied all planning. Charles Montgomery, titan of industry, master of his universe, had a massive stroke. The news sent ripples of carefully managed concern through the Montgomery network. Edward, ever the dutiful son in the public eye, ensured his father received the best possible care private suite in the city's most exclusive hospital wing, round-the-clock specialist nurses. He and Isabel made brief, tasteful appearances, perfectly conveying filial piety for the benefit of onlookers before rushing back to manage the crisis at Montgomery Industries, a crisis undoubtedly exacerbated by the sudden power vacuum. The actual, grueling work of sitting by Charles's bedside, of dealing with the day-to-day realities of severe illness, fell largely to me and Dan. Despite the fresh, raw wound of the inheritance meeting, despite the lifetime of slights, he was still my father. Some deeply ingrained sense of duty, perhaps a lingering, foolish hope for a connection that had never materialized, kept me there. Dan came because he loved me, sitting patiently for hours, offering quiet support, running errands, talking to doctors when I felt too exhausted or emotionally frayed. Charles was physically diminished, his powerful frame weakened, his sharp mind clouded and often confused. His left side was paralyzed, his speech slurred and difficult. Yet, his personality, stripped bare by illness, remained stubbornly, cruelly intact. His moments of lucidity were often filled with frustration, impatience, and flashes of the old ruthlessness, now directed haphazardly at the nurses, the doctors, and most frequently at me. He rarely acknowledged Dan's presence. Towards me, he was demanding, critical. He'd bark orders, complain about the temperature, the food, the noise. There was no softening, no deathbed reconciliation, no acknowledgement of my constant presence. He seemed suspicious of my motives, occasionally narrowing his good eye as if trying to decipher why I was there, why I was being attentive. The idea that it might simply be doggedly concerned seemed beyond his comprehension. Business was the only lens through which he viewed the world. Transactions the only language he truly understood. The breaking point, the moment the last vestiges of bruised affection turned irrevocably to ice, came late one afternoon. I'd been sitting with him for hours, reading aloud, mostly to fill the oppressive silence. The nurse had stepped out briefly. Charles had been drifting in and out of a restless sleep. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, surprisingly alert, but unfocused. He stared straight at me, but his gaze seemed to pass through me. "Ellison," he barked, his voice slurred but sharp with command. Ellison was one of his senior VPs, a name I'd heard countless times over the years. "Get the Q3 projections on my desk by morning, and tell Thompson the deal closes Friday, with or without his concessions. No more delays." He glared at me, expecting compliance. Ellison, he saw me, his daughter, who had spent countless hours by his side, holding his hand, tending to his needs, and he saw a subordinate, a business associate. He called me by another man's name and issued a work order. In that instant, the full, devastating truth landed with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just undervalued or misunderstood. To him, in the core of his being, I barely existed as his child. I was interchangeable with his staff, my presence only registering when it could serve a function he understood, a task, a transaction. All the years of trying, of hoping for a crumb of paternal affection, of acceptance, it was all a waste. I had never been his daughter in the way Edward was his son. I was Ellison. A profound, chilling clarity washed over me. The hurt was immense, a deep, hollow ache. But beneath it, something else solidified. The simmering resentment, the cold anger ignited by the will, now flared into a white-hot, controlled flame. The years of quiet suffering, of swallowing indignities, were over. The injustice wasn't just something to endure anymore. It was something to be rectified. Dramatically, I didn't answer him. I stood up slowly, my movements stiff. I looked down at the frail, demanding man in the bed, the man who had shaped my life through his indifference and disapproval. And I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering affection, only a vast, echoing emptiness where love should have been, rapidly filling with a chilling resolve. He called me Allison. The thought echoed as I walked out of the room, leaving him waiting for projections he would never read. This wasn't just a slight. It wasn't just unfairness. It was erasure, and erasure demanded a response. They thought they had secured their legacy, their power, their control. They thought I was a negligible factor, easily managed, easily dismissed. They were wrong. The warm, accommodating daughter was gone, replaced by someone they wouldn't recognize. Someone shaped by their cruelty, fueled by their indifference. Someone who finally understood the only language they truly respected, power. And I decided, in that sterile hospital corridor, that I would find my own. The debt they owed me wasn't financial. It was existential, and I would make them pay. The game had changed. I wasn't just rattling the bars anymore. I was looking for the key, or perhaps the dynamite. The opportunity presented itself with an almost theatrical sense of timing, born, ironically, from Edward's carelessness. My father, after weeks in the hospital, was eventually moved back to the mansion, requiring constant nursing care. The house felt like a mausoleum, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken resentments. Edward and Isabel maintained their routine of brief, dutiful visits, their concern always seeming to evaporate the moment they stepped back into their waiting car. One afternoon, I arrived to relieve the day nurse and found Edward in father's study. He was on the phone, pacing agitatedly, discussing market fluctuations with someone. He barely acknowledged me, just waved vaguely towards the door, indicating he'd be done shortly. When he finally finished his call, he seemed stressed, preoccupied, just grabbing some old tax files Dad wanted. Well, thought he wanted, he muttered distractedly, gesturing towards a stack of folders on the large desk. God, this is a mess. I've got a board meeting. Can you make sure Nurse Reynolds gives him his meds on time? Isabel and I might be late for dinner. He glanced at his watch again, grabbed a single slim file from the stack, and hurried out, leaving the rest scattered across the polished mahogany. He left the study door slightly ajar. Normally, I wouldn't have lingered. Father's study felt like forbidden territory, the epicenter of his power and my exclusion. But something made me pause. Edward's hurried departure, the unusual disarray on the desk, and the fact that Charles, in his current state, was highly unlikely to be requesting specific tax files. Curiosity, tinged with the cold resolve that had become my constant companion since the Ellison incident, pulled me towards the desk. It wasn't tax files Edward had been looking through. The folders contained recent investment reports, internal memos, correspondence, standard corporate fare mostly, but tucked beneath a thick prospectus was a smaller, locked leather-bound journal and, beside it, a sleek, encrypted flash drive carelessly left behind. It wasn't Montgomery Industries' standard issue. It looked personal. My heart began to beat faster. This felt different. Edward was usually meticulous, almost pathologically organized when it came to maintaining control and appearances. Leaving this here, unlocked, unattended, it spoke of significant stress, a crack in his polished facade. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the flash drive. What if the journal was locked, but the drive on a hunch? I looked around the desk. Taped discreetly to the underside, almost invisible unless you were searching, was a tiny slip of paper with a complex alphanumeric sequence written on it. A password. Unbelievably careless, or perhaps unbelievably arrogant, assuming no one would dare. My decision was instantaneous. This was more than curiosity now. It felt like fate. An opportunity dropped carelessly into my lap. I slipped the flash drive and the small piece of paper into my purse. I glanced towards the hallway silence. The nurse was presumably with Father in his bedroom upstairs. I took out my phone, quickly snapped photos of the covers and a few random pages of the scattered documents on the desk, focusing on anything that looked like internal correspondence or private notes. Then, I straightened the remaining folders, mimicking Edward's haphazard stack, closed the study door quietly, and went upstairs to check on Father, my mind racing. Later that night, back in the comforting normalcy of my own home, with Dan reading quietly beside me on the sofa, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. My hands were clammy. Dan looked over, sensing my tension. "What's that?" he asked. "Something Edward left behind," I said, my voice low. I think it might be important." I typed in the password. Access granted. The contents that unfolded on the screen were staggering. It wasn't just one smoking gun. It was an entire arsenal. Encrypted emails, spreadsheets detailing hidden accounts, scanned memos marked confidential, destroy, and personal notes. It took hours, stretching late into the night, to sift through it all, the initial shock giving way to a sickening, then empowering clarity. The drive contained clear evidence of financial malfeasance, records of shell corporations used to siphon funds from Montgomery Industries for personal use by Edward, details of insider trading deals conducted through intermediaries, inflated expense reports signed off by complicit executives. It wasn't just unethical. Much of it was blatantly illegal. Paternal complicity, emails between Edward and Charles, dating back several years, revealed my father wasn't just aware of some of Edward's questionable activities. He had actively advised on concealing them, using his influence to quash internal inquiries, ensuring his chosen successor remained untarnished, at least publicly. The killer instinct he admired was apparently not limited to legitimate business. Personal sabotage, this cut the deepest. I found email exchanges between Charles and a former mentor of mine, a well-respected figure in the arts funding world. Years ago, I had been on the verge of securing a major leadership position at a prestigious foundation. It had inexplicably fallen through at the last minute. The emails revealed Charles had subtly, devastatingly, used his influence to poison the well, suggesting I lacked the seriousness and financial acumen required, that my association might prove embarrassing to the foundation's more conservative donors. He had actively torpedoed my career opportunity because he disapproved of my chosen field, considering it unbecoming of a Montgomery. He didn't want me failing, perhaps, but he certainly didn't want me succeeding on my own terms, outside his control. Social undermining. Further messages, these between Edward and Isabel, contained transcripts of conversations where they systematically bad-mouthed me to influential figures in Chicago society, painting me as naive, financially irresponsible, and slightly pathetic, the artistic daughter who married beneath her station. They were actively working to isolate me, to ensure my image remained exactly as they and father defined it, negligible. My breath hitched. I felt cold, then hot, waves of emotion washing over me: disbelief, fury, a profound sense of violation. He hadn't just dismissed me. He had actively worked against me. My father, my brother, his wife, they hadn't just ignored my path. They had laid mines along it. Dan had come to stand behind me, reading over my shoulder, his silence growing heavier with each revelation. When I finally looked up at him, his face was grim, his eyes filled with protective anger. "Amy," he started, his voice low. "They didn't just hold me back, Dan," I whispered, the words thick with a toxic blend of rage and a strange, dark sense of power. "They actively tried to break me, to keep me in my place." I wasn't trembling anymore. The anger wasn't chaotic. It was focused, clarifying. The flash drive felt heavy in my hand, not with data, but with potential energy. It was the weapon I hadn't known I was looking for. The dynamite. "What are you going to do?" Dan asked, his gaze searching mine. I met his eyes, and he saw the shift in me, the final hardening. The Amelia Hayes who endured, who hoped, who tried to win approval, was gone. "I'm going to do," I said, my voice steady, devoid of heat, but resonating with chilling certainty, what they should have known I was capable of all along. "I'm going to take back my life, and I'm going to make them pay for every lie, every dismissal, every deliberate act of sabotage." The quiet warmth of our living room suddenly felt like a war room. The initial shock was morphing into strategic thinking. Dan watched me, a mixture of concern and understanding in his eyes. He knew me, the gentle wife, the dedicated mother, the passionate advocate for the arts. But he also saw the Montgomery blood in me, the resilience forged in the fires of their disregard. "This is huge, Amy," he said quietly. "Exposing this won't just hurt Edward. It will bring down the whole Montgomery name. Your father, my father made his choices. I cut him off." The ice in my voice surprising even myself. He chose his legacy over his daughter. He actively harmed me. Edward built his success on lies and theft. With father's blessing, they built this monstrosity. They deserve to see it fall. Dan hesitated for only a moment. He saw the resolve in my face. The culmination of years of pain transmuted into an unshakable purpose. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Okay, Amy, what's the plan? How do we do this?" His support was unwavering, absolute. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. Our daughter, Liv, with her sharp mind and intuitive grasp of technology, might also have a role to play, though the thought of involving her felt heavy. But this was about more than just revenge now. It felt like justice. A brutal, devastating justice, perhaps, but justice nonetheless. We spent the rest of the night meticulously copying the contents of the flash drive onto multiple secure backups, storing them separately. We discussed strategy, timing, potential allies, and the inevitable fallout. Sleep was impossible, replaced by a nervous, focused energy. The fear of discovery was real, a low thrum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a sense of righteous purpose, a grim excitement as the plan began to take shape. We weren't just victims anymore. We were players, and we were about to change the game entirely. The war had begun. The weeks that followed were lived onto parallel tracks. On the surface, life continued. I visited my father, dealt with nurses, managed outreach, had dinner with Dan and Liv. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a meticulous, high-stakes operation was underway. Our house, usually filled with the scent of coffee and old books, became a clandestine headquarters. Dan, initially hesitant about the sheer destructive potential of our plan, quickly became my steadfast partner. His quiet academic demeanor concealed a fierce loyalty and a sharp analytical mind. He helped me organize the evidence, cross-reference emails, and trace the flow of illicit funds described in Edward's files. His historical perspective provided an odd comfort. Empires rose and fell, he reminded me, often due to internal wrath and hubris. We decided, reluctantly, to involve Liv. Her generation's innate understanding of digital footprints, encryption, and secure communication was invaluable. When I laid out the core facts, not the petty insults, but the concrete evidence of financial crimes and the sabotage of my own career, her reaction wasn't shock, but a grim understanding. "I always knew Grandpa and Uncle Edward were ruthless, Mom," she said, her young face set with a maturity beyond her years. "I just didn't know it was this bad. What do you need me to do?" Her immediate alignment, her lack of judgment about my chosen path, was both validating and sobering. She helped us secure anonymous communication channels, set up encrypted cloud storage, and research the key players in financial journalism and regulatory bodies. The planning consumed our nights, whispered conversations over laptops glowing in the dark, double-checking backups, drafting anonymous communications. The stress was immense, a constant hum of anxiety beneath the surface. Every ringing phone made me jump. Every unexpected email sent a jolt of adrenaline. Was it them? Had Edward realized the drive was missing? Had he guessed? But his arrogance, it seemed, was his Achilles heel. He appeared oblivious, consumed by the pressures of running the company under the shadow of Charles's illness and, unknown to him, the ticking time bomb we were preparing. We needed the perfect moment to detonate it. Not just any day, but one that would maximize the impact, ensuring the fallout was swift, brutal, and inescapable. We considered several options. The week before the annual shareholders meeting, during the Montgomery Charity Gala, Isabel's pet project, or coinciding with a major announcement about Edward's leadership. The opportunity crystallized when Montgomery Industries announced Edward's official appointment as permanent CEO, shedding the interim title he'd held since Charles's stroke. There was to be a press conference, a celebratory dinner for key investors, and board members a carefully orchestrated coronation. That would be the day his ascent turned into a spectacular full. We compiled separate, targeted packages of evidence, one for a renowned investigative journalist at a major national newspaper known for tackling corporate corruption, another, more detailed dossier for the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) and the District Attorney's Office, focusing on the financial crimes, a third, highlighting the ethical breaches and reputational risk for select, influential members of the Montgomery Industries board known for their independent streaks, delivered anonymously. Liv ensured the digital deliveries were untraceable, routed through multiple servers, scrubbed of metadata. The night before the plan leak felt interminable. Sleep was a foreign concept. Dan and I sat in the dark kitchen, nursing cups of tea we didn't taste. "Are we absolutely sure about this, Amy?" he asked quietly, not questioning the justification, but the sheer magnitude of it. "There's no going back after tomorrow." I looked out the window at the sleeping city. They built their world on lies, Dan, on hurting people, including their own family. They made my father complicit. They tried to erase me. My voice was low, steady. Going back isn't an option. It never was. This is the only way forward, not just for me, but for Liv, for us, to be free of them. I took a deep breath. I am sure. The next morning, as Edward prepared for his triumphant press conference, we initiated the sequence. Liv confirmed the digital packages were sent, encrypted emails dispatched through anonymizing services, physical copies, delivered by bonded courier with no return address, were scheduled to arrive at the relevant offices mid-morning. Then we waited. It was the longest wait of my life. The first tremor hit around lunchtime, a notification from a news alert app. Montgomery Industries CEO appointment overshadowed by allegations of financial impropriety. My breath caught. I clicked the link. The investigative journalist had published. The story was cautious, but damning, citing anonymous sources and verified documents detailing shell corporations, suspicious transactions, and hints of insider trading implicating Edward Montgomery directly. It mentioned Charles Montgomery's potential awareness and cover-up. Within an hour, it was escalating. Other news outlets picked up the story. Financial news tickers flashed updates. Montgomery and MTG stock plunges amid CEO scandal rumors. My phone started buzzing, not from my family, but from acquaintances, friends in the nonprofit world, expressing shock, asking if I was okay. The carefully constructed wall between my life and the Montgomery sphere was dissolving. Through contacts Dan had in the university's business school, we heard whispers of chaos erupting within Montgomery Industries. The press conference had been abruptly canceled. Board members were demanding emergency meetings. Lawyers were being summoned. By late afternoon, the storm had fully broken. The SEC confirmed it was launching a formal investigation based on information received. The DA's office issued a non-committal statement about reviewing serious allegations. Key investors began publicly distancing themselves. Montgomery Industries stock was in freefall. I imagined the scene inside the Montgomery fortress. The panic, the accusations, the frantic calls. I pictured Edward, his polished confidence shattered, facing the ruin of his meticulously planned ascent. I pictured Isabel, her social standing evaporating, her world crumbling. I pictured Charles, lying in his sick, perhaps dimly aware through the fog of his illness that the legacy he prized above all else, the legacy he had sacrificed his daughter for, was imploding. There was no elation, no triumphant fist pumping, just a profound, chilling sense of inevitability, of consequence delivered. We sat in our living room, Dan, Liv, and I, watching the news unfold on the tablet screen. The commentators used words like shocking, scandal, potential criminal charges. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with power and success, was now irrevocably linked to disgrace. Liv reached over and squeezed my hand. "They're getting what they deserve, Mom." Her voice was quiet but firm. Dan put his arm round me. "It's done, Eames. It was done." The empire was shaking, its foundations cracked, perhaps fatally. The years of careful construction, built on arrogance and deceit, were crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. The silence in our house felt heavy, charged. We had unleashed the storm, and now we could only watch as it raged, consuming the world that had tried so hard to consume me. The sense of power was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly consuming. I had fought back, not with their weapons of wealth and influence, but with the truth they had tried so hard to bury. And the truth, it turned out, was the most devastating weapon of all. The downfall was as swift and brutal as we had anticipated, yet watching it unfold felt strangely surreal. The media frenzy continued for weeks. Montgomery Industries, once a titan, became synonymous with corporate scandal. The stock price cratered, wiping out billions in value. Edward was forced to resign as CEO amidst the escalating investigations. The board, panicked and desperate to salvage what remained, brought in an outside crisis management team. We heard through the grapevine that Edward was facing multiple lawsuits from shareholders and potential criminal indictments from both the SEC and the DA's office. His carefully curated world had imploded. Isabel vanished from the social circuit. Invitations dried up. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The charity gala she chaired was abruptly postponed indefinitely. Her currency social standing derived from the Montgomery name, and wealth was now worthless, tainted by association. Their son, William, accustomed to the privilege and deference that came with his name, reportedly faced ostracism at his Ivy League university. His future prospects suddenly clouded by his family's disgrace. Charles Montgomery, already frail, suffered another, more severe stroke shortly after the news broke. This time, there was no recovery. He passed away quietly a week later, never fully regaining consciousness, never witnessing the full extent of the destruction wrought upon the legacy he had worshipped. There was a perverse irony in his escaping the final reckoning, yet perhaps the knowledge that his empire was crumbling was its own form of punishment. His funeral was a subdued affair, sparsely attended by nervous-looking business associates and distant relatives. Edward looked gaunt, haunted. Isabel stood beside him, veiled, a statue of brittle pride. I attended, a dutiful daughter performing a final, empty ritual. There were no tears, only a vast, quiet emptiness where grief might have been. The confrontation I had both anticipated and dreaded came a few months later. Edward requested a meeting, not through lawyers, but a personal, almost desperate email sent from a generic account. He suggested a neutral coffee shop downtown, far from the usual Montgomery haunts. I went alone. Dan offered to come, but I needed to do this myself. Edward was waiting at a small table in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked years older. The expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, the arrogance replaced by a weary desperation. He flinched slightly when he saw me approach. "Amelia," he said, his voice raspy. He didn't meet my eyes immediately. I sat down opposite him, waiting. The silence stretched, awkward, heavy. They're talking plea deals," he finally mumbled, staring into his cup. "Lawyers think I'll face prison time. Isabel, she's talking about leaving, taking William." He looked up then, his eyes pleading. "Amy, I know things were difficult between us, between you and Dad, but this," his voice cracked. "Did you have to destroy everything? Everyone?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time without the filter of intimidated younger sister. I saw a man broken by his own ambition and deceit, reaping the consequences he had sown. There was no pity in my heart, only a cold, hard clarity. "This wasn't about difficulties, Edward," I replied, my voice level, calm. It was the calmness that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "This wasn't just about money or inheritance snubs. This was your Yursta being dismissed, undermined, and actively sabotaged by you and by Father." His eyes widened slightly. "Sabotaged? What are you talking about?" "I know about the foundation job, Edward," I said quietly. "I know you and Isabel spent years systematically undermining my reputation, painting me as incompetent and irrelevant." I leaned forward slightly. "And I know about the shell corporations, the insider deals, the money you stole from the company father built, all while pretending to be the worthy successor. He visibly paled, understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew I had the proof. How? He whispered. You were careless, I said simply. You underestimated me. You all did. You thought I was just the artistic daughter. Harmless and insignificant, I held his gaze. You thought legacy was about stock prices and control. You never understood that real legacy is built on integrity, on how you treat people, especially your own family. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Defeated. Can't you help me? He pleaded. The desperation raw now. Talk to the investigators. Say there was a misunderstanding. For Dad's memory, a bitter laugh almost escaped me. For Dad's memory, the man who called me Allison, the man who conspired to ruin my career? No, Edward, I said, the finality in my voice like the closing of a heavy door. This isn't about money. It never was. Not really. This is the price for the years you and Father trampled on me, dismissed me, tried to erase me, the price for your greed and his complicity. I stood up, gathering my coat. You built this hell for yourself, you and Father. Now, live in it. I turned and walked away, leaving him sitting amidst the wreckage of his life. There was no surge of triumph as I stepped out into the bustling street. No outward display of satisfaction, just a deep, quiet sense of accounts settled, of a heavy weight finally lifted. The cold knot of resentment I had carried for so long had dissolved, replaced by a stark, clear emptiness that felt, paradoxically, like peace. Months later, life found a new equilibrium. The Montgomery scandal continued to generate occasional headlines, but the initial inferno had subsided. Legal battles dragged on through the complex unraveling of trusts and estates, complicated by the lawsuits and investigations. A court-appointed administrator oversaw a more equitable, albeit significantly diminished, distribution of what remained of Charles's personal assets, separate from the ruined corporation. It wasn't a fortune, not by Montgomery standards, but it was a sum significantly larger than the insulting trust fund originally proposed. One quiet evening, Dan, Liv, and I sat together in our living room. The light was soft. The aroma of brewing coffee filled the air. News notifications about the ongoing Montgomery legal saga occasionally pinged on Liv's phone, but they felt distant now, part of another world. There was a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Dan reached over and took my hand, his touch warm, grounding. Liv looked at me, her expression a complex mixture of pride, understanding, and perhaps a touch of awe at the transformation she had witnessed in her mother. So, Dan said gently, breaking the silence, "What now?" I looked out the window at the familiar neighborhood street, bathed in the warm glow of twilight. The fierce satisfaction of retribution had faded, leaving behind a quiet space for reflection. The victory felt complete, but not joyful. It was a necessary excision, a painful removal of a toxic element from our lives. Now, I said, turning back to them, a sense of purpose solidifying within me, we build something different. I told them my decision. The money I received wouldn't be used for luxuries, for attempting to replicate the hollow grandeur of the Montgomery lifestyle. Instead, I would invest all of it, not in stocks or bonds, but in outreach. We could finally buy that old print shop, renovate it properly, expand our programs, establish an endowment to ensure its future, perhaps even create a small foundation to help others like me, those marginalized or dismissed by powerful families, those needing support to pursue paths deemed unworthy by conventional measures. We don't need to become like them, I said, meeting Dan's eyes, then Liv's. Their legacy crumbled because it was built on greed and exclusion. We'll build our own legacy, Amy, Dan, and Liv, a legacy of creativity, community, and support. Something we can actually be proud of. A slow smile spread across Dan's face. I love that idea, Ames. Liv nodded, her eyes shining. That's perfect, Mom. The path I had taken was harsh, the consequences devastating for those who had wronged me. There was a certain grim satisfaction in seeing justice served, and watching the arrogant brought low. Revenge, in its own way, had cleared the slate. But looking at my husband and daughter, feeling the genuine warmth and connection in our own home, I understood the deeper truth. The real victory wasn't in their destruction, but in our creation. It wasn't about tearing down their corrupt empire, but about building something positive and meaningful in its place. Retribution can feel like justice, a necessary balancing of skills long tipped by arrogance and cruelty. It can bring a temporary, satisfying sense of closure, but true strength, lasting fulfillment, comes not from dwelling on the wreckage of the past, but from constructing a better future based on your own values. The greatest triumph isn't watching your enemies fall. It's rising above them, stronger, wiser, and choosing to build rather than destroy. That is the legacy worth leaving. How do you find today's story? Leave a comment below. If you like this video, please like and share. Especially don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our interesting and exciting stories.